So you should be now able to see the presentation.
Yes.
All right. I'd like to introduce this topic by saying that a couple of years ago, I was doing something similar in terms of the subject of post-human societies and environments. This particular one has direct link to visual art, which is the topic of this year's colloquium, and so I try to put together some of the ideas that are behind the creation of literary and film narratives and stories. So I called it visual art in post-human stories or literature and film, with a focus on how visual art is not only directly used, but also how it becomes a kind of narrative instrument in what are called post-human stories or post-human environments. And I will get to explain. With post-human environments, we're basically talking about environments in which humans are no longer the central element. So the kind of anthropocentric idea that Homo sapiens is the center of everything, both in terms of civilization on Earth and also of psychology in stories, the culture in stories, and the interaction between individual members of society. That kind of idea is no longer present. Is no longer the essential idea, the heart of the story. So this goes in many ways against what we know as humanism. If not against, then it kind of extends it and introduces other members of society, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There are philosophers of post-humanism who even use the word rejection, like Rosie Braidotti in this quotation. She says that post-human ideas basically reject the human category as something that is very narrow, and of course fairly elitist, because you know, we're not only masters of the earth, but also masters of the universe, or so we believe. And the post-human environments, post-human stories, post-human characters in them, if you want, they all come to challenge that. There are other theorists, such as Mads Rosendal Thompson, who says this is something that has long fascinated humanity. If you remember, you know, the kind of rebellion against gods. Well, if you remember is the wrong way of putting it, but it goes all the way back to ancient Greece and Greek mythology, and Prometheus and his story, for example, creating humans in some kind of rebellion and denial of gods. Frankenstein clearly is one of the best known examples of a story where you have a character that is not human necessarily, was not born to a human mother, but was created, made by a very mysterious experiment done by a scientist. So it's something that today we very often relate to technology. You've heard of cyborgs, organisms that have been enhanced, changed in some way. And of course, the extent to which they're changed then challenges our understanding of to what extent they're human. Thompson also says that in art, in literature, film, but also in dramatic art, performative art, in visual art, there are many stories, ideas, individual elements which engage our creativity and our imagination, and they very often go beyond what's realistic. But some of them are very realistic, particularly today with the onset of genetic technology, for example. So we have the ability, technically, to create beings which we would have an ethical and philosophical problem to describe as human, because they're either enhanced, changed, adjusted, or they're created from scratch in a way that goes against the kind of understanding that a human has to be born to a human mother. And of course, in science fiction, this was something that has existed for a long time. And some of these stories that I will share with you, of course, present situations in which there are other beings than what we consider to be natural biological human beings, and in which they're part of a functioning society. Of course, as Matthew Gladden says here in this quotation, it's really important to consider or speculate at this point how that interaction would work and what it would look like and what would be the potential problems that it would bring along. These stories, of course, are set against that kind of backdrop in a post-human environment. And the idea behind this presentation is to show you how the authors of literary stories and then film narratives use visuals and visual art in direct reference or in implied ways to try to speculate about what this world would look like and what these characters would look like. So I'm going to start straight away with two books that feature characters that we might consider to be, I guess, an issue of the future. And these are characters that are cloned as opposed to born in Never Let Me Go, in Ishiguro's novel from 2005. And then there is his most recent novel called Klara and the Sun, which I hope some of you are familiar, or all of you are familiar with, which features a narrator that is not human, but it's an artificial intelligence. And of course, in both of these stories, we're not really told much about the society directly, but indirectly. In Never Let Me Go, we have a group of people who were created by the process known as cloning, and they're basically being educated in this kind of boarding school, traditional style English educational environment. But the sole purpose of their life is to be donors of organs. So a very bleak dystopian perspective. And in Klara and the Sun, we have an artificial intelligence called an artificial friend who is telling us the story. Solar-powered android called Klara, who becomes an artificial friend for a girl, because that society, of course, features girls who have to study very hard to get ahead, and then they have problems with their social life. The interesting thing about how both of these stories use visual art directly is that in Never Let Me Go, the cloned characters are given classical education. So that's languages, literature, but most of all, they're prompted and supported in being creative, particularly in visual art. And of course, visual art is something that in that story gives them what we may consider to be humanity, and it's implied on several levels in the story. It becomes a kind of a cruel paradox for them because they're being educated so they achieve some level of humanness and humanity as we know it, but at the same time they're basically bred as cattle for meat. So that kind of contradiction, if you want, or cruel paradox, is present throughout the story.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Have you moved the slides or not already?
I moved some of the slides, yeah.
Because we are still seeing only the application screen with the first slide still on. So maybe just share whole your screen and not only the application itself. I'm
sharing the whole screen right now.
It doesn't move. It shows the PowerPoint application and the outline, like we are working in it.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay, now we see it. It's on 6, slide 6.
So if I just show the screen like this, and then if I do this, then you see slide 1.
Yes.
And now it's moving.
Yes, environments.
Okay.
Good.
I don't know. Okay, all right. So I'll be going to, you see the titles of these books now, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now I guess now it's working. I don't know if for some reason, I mean, I had to update the application, the Zoom application, so it might have something to do with that. Anyway, so if you see that now.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll get rid of this. Then okay. All right. Yeah, so I can go. All right, sorry about that. I'll go back to the books then, and I'll click to another slide. Just now. All right. So art there becomes something that is used to expressing not only an ability to be like a human, but also become a human in terms of expressing the inner truth of oneself. You may want to say one's identity, as this quotation here suggests. And Ishiguro very much presents that idea in Never Let Me Go as something that is then very problematic because of what happens to these characters ethically. I mean, they're basically, like I said, used for organ donation, and they're, left to die. I think the cattle simile, the cattle metaphor is very strong there. In the other story, in Klara and the Sun, which I hope you can see now in the slide. So just wave if something goes wrong. Yeah, thank you. Visual art becomes something that is used directly to create the character of Klara, because we see everything through her eyes, and she's not human. We don't know exactly what she looks like, so she gives us only hints. There is a certain a character of a Mr. Capaldi, who is referred to as the artist, who is creating something that will improve the relationship between Klara and Josie, who is her human friend. And then we realize that what this artist is really doing, he is actually recreating another version of the human girl of Josie. And this is a very interesting description, in which it's like the description of a painting or a sculpture. And Klara is looking at it, but of course she's not an artist, she's an artificial intelligence. She doesn't really know what the difference directly might be. She's saying that she was leaning forward, her arms were outstretched, her fingers spread, and she seemed to be frozen, as if she was falling. And there were these little beams, little rays that illuminated her from various angles, forbidding her any refuge, making it impossible for her to move. Her face was very like that of the real Josie, so we realized that that's not the real one, but it's a copy. But because there was at the eyes no kind smile, and the upward curve of her lips gave her an expression I had never seen before. And so the art and the visual art sculpting, if you want, in the story, of course, here refers to copying human material and producing something that is post-human or other than human, if you want. Of course, in narrated stories such as this one, it's very difficult to present a clear visual image, particularly in Ishiguro stories, because he's very implicit rather than showing directly what things look like or what we should imagine. So he leaves a lot open to the reader's imagination. But once the genre changes to film, then we get a different story. In the drama, in Carol Churchill's fairly complicated story called A Number, we have a father who decides to clone his son because he wants to have a go at education and upbringing one more time because he believes that he failed. And of course, once on stage, you need to play with different instruments and use different techniques. Very often, in the visuals to the story, to the performance, mirrors are used to suggest the different cloned versions of the father's son. In movies, of course, there are visual effects, special effects that you can use. There are horror movies which play with the idea of post-human beings, such as Vincenzo Natali's movies, Splice, which plays with the idea of genetic manipulation and genetic creation of new beings. And of course, this is something which visually relies on human imagination that goes all the way back to the 16th century and to painters such as Hieronymus Bosch, for example. The Garden of Earthly Delights, of course, this is a really awful quality of a picture. But in Garden of Earthly Delights, if you look at the different sections in this, there are all kinds of crazy invented types of figures, which then very much like inform the visuals and the aesthetic approach of the movie makers in Splice. Here you have a genetically created, not just modified, being, I guess, rather than a person. So there's animal genes as well as human genes combined. And of course, this has dramatic, monstrous and tragic consequences. But the visuals rest on a change from kind of cute little baby through an adult thing being, like we see here, all the way to actually terrifying monster at the end. So there's this kind of a development in how that uses centuries old visual and aesthetic representation of good and evil, and so on and so forth. Then clearly with characters that are technologically and organically created, I think the most outstanding in many ways is the several seasons of the series Westworld. I think of course the aesthetic communication rests just like Spice on people's understanding of the development of visual art all the way from the Renaissance. If you look at the poster on the left, it's a direct reference to Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. And of course, that kind of image in Westworld refers to the process of creation of beings which are made to look exactly like humans, but of course they're artificially made. They have organic parts, but they're part machine, and they programmed and coded, and they're given certain narratives to follow because they're parts of this huge amusement park called Westworld. And of course the Westworld, I mean, this is a picture, a screenshot from the series, is all recreated to be an amusement park for rich clients, in which there are some humans who pay to be able to be there, but of course it's filled with characters that were made in this process that you can see in this picture. And of course, it's an outlet for violence and aggression and all kinds of activities that humans do to robots, they believe. But of course, this all changes the moment when the robots, the androids, become sentient, when they gain consciousness. Visually, it's really important, of course, for a film processing of this kind of story and this kind of narrative to make the artificial beings look exactly like humans, because that becomes the moral and ethical dilemma towards the end of season 1 in particular. Once they gain consciousness and they even understand their feelings, despite the fact that some of the feelings are programmed, they can feel pain, for example, then it becomes a whole different story for humans, morally and legally, who no longer feel that it's okay for them to be able to kill them, and do them harm and be violent and aggressive towards them. So the visuals behind this, of course, as the series progress, represent a certain change. As most of the androids in Westworld are copied from one story to another, they become, or they can be seen as kind of simulacra in the theory of Jean Baudrillard from the 20th century. Simulacra being imitations or copies of something and existing without necessarily carrying on the original meaning. Baudrillard himself even suggested that amusement parks are sources of simulacra, basically kind of repositories of them, because they create something that only imitates what's there in the real world. Here, the copies are flawless and perfect. And of course, in reference to visual art, in pop art, a lot of pop art was, of course, using ready-mades, objects that were taken from real life, copying something that in the pop art picture no longer existed as a standalone object, but was rather a reference to something. Trompe-l'œil, of course, is another technique that goes further back, which also rests on using imitations and copies and putting it in a different perspective. In Westworld, of course, this is something that is only implied, but the role of visual art, of course, just like in some of the other stories that I already mentioned, is ever present. You have androids, beings that are not human, like this character here, Dolores, who paints in one of her roles, and through her painting, she expresses a very specific mindset that has been coded into her brain, but that then becomes relevant for how she understands her role when she realizes who she is. And also in the following stories, in the following seasons of Westworld, her character becomes one who, through telling stories, through painting pictures of how things should be and where, not algorithms, but stories and paintings, she is controlling how other people become part of and how they interact in a more complex society. So she wants to take control of how human society and how android society is supposed to run. And the instrument that she uses for it is telling stories and painting visual pictures. For the series aesthetics, of course, it becomes really important to distinguish visually between human and non-human. Like in this picture, of course, you see a really stark contrast. But once it becomes obvious that the androids have consciousness and that they can have feelings and understand their role in the world, and they're indistinguishable from humans, that kind of uncanny feeling of metaphysical monstrosity, we know that they are different, but they look exactly the same, becomes something that drives the story and character development as well. So the visual representation here, of course, is absolutely crucial. Then in terms of a visual representation of post-human environments and worlds and landscapes, I guess the city landscape is something that becomes an absolutely essential element in Blade Runner 1982, the original movie, which, this kind of film noir aesthetics became what set the tone for most science fiction movies in the future. There's a whole series of original sketches and drawings that were animated pictures that were used to make the visuals for the movie. So we're talking 1982. This is from a science fiction movie set in the future. And if you just look at this picture here, of course, it's reminiscent of film noir of decades before the film was made. Fast forward to the sequel to Blade Runner, and you have a different aesthetic, which rests more on the kind of gallery-like view of where post-human characters, post-human beings are created. Like here you see, it's like a scene in a museum, but in reality, it's a scene that takes place in a corporation that makes replicants, that is not human beings. The sequel, of course, is true to the original's aesthetic of a really dark city. The noir character of that is maintained. Then you go back to the interior where replicants are born in this plastic-like womb of sorts. But of course, this looks like a gallery installation in many respects, and this is just one of the visuals that become an essential part of how the story is told. You have rooms which, you could find in museums of modern art easily, I think, because they communicate different things that relate to the story. But of course, for lack of time, I'm not going to go into every single detail. I just wanted to make, to feast your eyes on some of these images. And then finally, Ex Machina is probably the most a movie that is features an android character in its center, an artificial intelligence, and the role of visual art is probably the most explicit. It starts with this painting. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is Jackson Pollock, the abstract expressionist. This picture is called Number 5, and he painted in 1948. An abstract expressionist painting, in particular Pollock's painting, is also referred to as drip painting, because he wasn't using a vertical canvas, but rather painted horizontal. I actually have a picture. Yeah. So this is Jackson Pollock drip painting. He wasn't really using brush. He would kneel or squat on the ground and use a stick of wood or a broken brush to just drip the paint on the canvas. And of course, many people claimed that, well, how can you control what you're painting? It's just random. He said, somehow I can control where the drip paint goes, and it's not accidental, because I don't believe in accident. So not much of an explanation, but the suggestion, of course, was that there is something implied here in the process that does not make this automatic. It's not controlled, but it's not random either. And the movie makers, of course, use this to explain how the artificial intelligence, the mind of Ava, the main character, was made. So the creator, Nathan, these are snippets from the script. The creator and her maker, if you want, Nathan, says, if you think about Jackson Pollock, the drip painter, what he did was he let his mind go blank, and his hand would go where he wanted it to go. It was not deliberate, but it was not random. It was someplace in between, and he called it automatic art. And of course, he explains that this is the process which he took as a model for thinking about how an artificial mind could be designed. So the artificial mind, of course, cannot be deliberate in terms of, you can't just code it fully, but it cannot be random. He put all of the big data from a huge search engine into her head, and then tried to find that sweet spot between being deliberate and being random. Yeah, because the argument goes, if you follow the arrow in the picture, what if Pollock had reversed the challenge, and instead of trying to make art without thinking, what if he'd said, well, I can't paint anything unless I know exactly why I'm doing it. What would have happened? And of course, the other character understands this idea, and he says, well, he would never have painted anything. So it's not the reason or not the end of the process, but it's something that leads us to the process. And I think if you look at abstract expressionist art, to many people, it says nothing. To many people, it says a lot. And then to many people, or most people, it's something undecided. Now, Jackson Pollock seems to be a prime example of that. But of course, what it does is it completely changes our understanding of art and of how much in control we are of our creativity very often. The character of Ava, of course, who is made using this kind of approach, is then presented in interaction with a human being, and we see her from different angles in rooms with mirrors, in what we might call my kind of modern architecture, open space environment. And depending on the perspective, depending on the reflection in the mirror, we either see her as a mere technological thing, sometimes a combination of a technological being and a human being. Sometimes she appears to be very human. It all depends on the angle that we look at, kind of like some of the old paintings of Hans Holbein, if you want, when there are things that you see only from a certain angle. There are theorists who refer to the aesthetic representation of Ava in the movie as a kind of technological fetish, but of course it's very feminine, and the fact that she does look, when she puts on clothes and wears makeup and everything, she does look exactly like a human, also gives her a certain attractiveness, and her character is also sexualized to some extent, which is a great deal to do with what she looks like. She also draws, and I'm going to end on this because there are people who analyze the film who suggest that her drawings actually become some kind of guide through the development of the movie's plot. So some of them follow the kind of Renaissance painting, some of them imitate modern art. She expresses her developing consciousness through her paintings. If you look at the one on the left-hand side, of course, it's just something that is used like a computer would paint through dots and pixels and whatnot. And then she moves from landscapes to more complex paintings, drawings. And with that, the movie communicates, just like it does with her appearance and just like it does with the inclusion of abstract expressionist painting as a source of thinking about her mind. That way, the movie tries to basically portray her character, and her character, to take us all the way back, is not human, and she has a very specific motivation. And the motivation is not really explained, but it's hinted at through these drawings and through the angles with which we look at her, and of course through her interaction with the other characters. So I'm going to end there. Thank you. And if there are any questions, then maybe happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I will start with the first question. You mentioned Westworld. As I understood it, that's a series like from recent years. I actually watched a film which was made like I think in the 70s or 60s. Do you know that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 1973, and it's the it's actually it was used as a as a kind of motive from which then the television series started in what was it, 2016, 2015, something like that. So yeah, but it's that introduced the idea that there is technology which allows some kind of robots to look almost like people, and then they're used in an amusement park, basically to be shot at by rich clients. And of course, the idea is that they cannot hurt the people because that's impossible, but the people can, kill them as they like to let the steam out. And of course, it all goes wrong when one of them malfunctions. So
I think, at least as I remember it, that the primary reason was not to shock the androids, but it was to recreate the feeling of different historical eras. I think there was, besides Westworld, there was a part situated in Arthur's
in ancient
Arthur era.
Rome.
Yes, as well.
But of course, because it was thought of as a a kind of amusement park where you had to pay to get in. It was for entertainment purposes. So, what sells best, of course, is orgies in ancient Rome and shooting in the Wild West and stuff like that. So to have the kind of fun that you cannot have in a regular society, because it's either illegal or it's problematic, to say the least. Yeah.
Hey, Rasim has a question.
Yes. Thank you for this presentation. I would like to ask you, do you think that this idea of creating humans and genetically modifying them is an attempt to defy the humans' notion of limitation and to show that humans are the gods of their own realm? Do you believe so? Or is it another, there is another purpose of this idea of creating humans?
Well, that's a really difficult question. And I don't think we have the time for that discussion, but I'll try, because it's really, really complex. But clearly, if to give you a specific example, Ex Machina, the movie that I mentioned last, has a character who is fictional, but is very similar to people that we know. He is the owner of an unnamed, well, it's like not a real one, but an actual search engine. Yeah, so it's like Google, but it's not Google. And of course, he is this tech giant who creates all kinds of things, and among them, he starts creating androids that look like people. He himself gives these androids imposed roles. They're all women, so there are gender roles, and they're maids, and they're like sexual servants to him, and he basically abuses them, and then he gets rid of them. In the movie, he is referred to by the other character as a god. So I think it's transcending our ability as humans. It's the God complex, the Prometheus complex, if you want, or what we call Frankenstein complex. It's been present for centuries. And today, with the technology that we have, I think, to some extent, I think that's what people will always test their boundaries. So I can do this. I can create a being by, putting some genes together and then adding some technology. I will try. And part of what these stories in books and movies and television are trying to do, I think, is to give us room to think or imagine what it would be like if this were to happen in real life, so that we can, I don't think we're going to be prepared if it happens, but we will at least have had some discussion by then, social discussion and social consideration. And because there are legal and political aspects to this. clearly you have beings that are not human, but they have consciousness. So do you give them citizenship or human rights, or, you know, will they pay taxes, and so on? So your question is really complex, but I think to some extent, clearly, it suggests that people are trying to test the boundaries of what they're used to, and maybe, you know, try something that might be in direct opposition to the kind of culture and civilization that we have now. And maybe, as some of these stories suggest, that it will be okay, or maybe there will be disastrous consequences. But it's very difficult to answer.
Thank you. I do believe you answered very well.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Can I add something?
Mhm.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for such a great presentation. This is my favorite topic, and post-humanist literature has always piqued my interest. And since you have covered most important things, I would like to add that the interplay between post-humanist literature and visual depiction of characters is more like an aesthetic attitude that questions conscious reality, that questions humanity. We also see that in the character Eva, as you mentioned. We see that in Westworld, humans seem more dehumanized, and this is apparent in the theme park. This is the power of post-humanist literature. Producers of these works put the viewer in a state of a critical reflection by introducing a plurality of perspectives. And in doing so, they approach, I think, profound ontological questions. This literature holds reality by a fine thread. They question its creation and inner workings. And by doing so, they encode their narratives with philosophical and also, as I said, ontological ideas. And this is what nonfiction literature, I think, lacks.
Mhm.
So this is why I very much like post-humanist literature.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm. Thank you. If I can make just a really short comment, I think that from the point of view of how we look at literature as some kind of source of understanding the importance of our own morality and ethical values, and our ability to interact peacefully and, you know, progressively as humans. These stories, like you said in Westworld, I think turn that upside down, because in the, you know, at least in some parts of the story, it's actually the androids, the non-human characters, who show, you know, if not more peaceful, then definitely more complex way of understanding civilization and culture and humans in the end. Then later on, of course, come attempts at world dominance, clearly, but that's very interesting how, you know, it's not just rising against oppression and violence, but also a more complex understanding of how civilization works or doesn't. Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Also related to that, in many of these films, when they represent like the revolution of androids against humanity, there is this idea behind it that there is always someone who has to like to program the androids to rebel. So again, it comes to the fact that actually it's the man, the human, who is the evil one.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the stories.
I mean, they kind of copy human behavior because they're coded by humans. But I think if you look at most of these stories, then returning to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you'll see the same kind of development. You'll see that there is this person who wanted to do something which was good and progressive, because Victor Frankenstein claims in the novel that he wants to create a new species and he wants to get rid of diseases and he wants to make people live better lives. But in part of the process, he creates this being, which is referred to as the monster. And then they basically try to kill each other. Yeah, because of course, Victor Frankenstein is not able to satisfy the monster's desire to have a female companion and whatnot. And so they kind of chase each other. And in the end, when Victor Frankenstein dies, the monster, before he disappears, says or communicates that he's actually really sad about Victor Frankenstein dying. So there's that, it's like, yeah, God and his creations, you know, Greek gods and their creations, Prometheus and so on. All those stories, I think, then become visible in Westworld and in what you said, programming them to be, not just to be obedient servants, but to have something human, which is resistance, maybe questioning, doubting, asking questions, going against the flow, etc., etc. Yeah.
Also, as you were talking about Jason Pollock and his art, it reminded me of my presentation on Monday when I was discussing Tolkien's literary theory and how he believed that the artists, they are basically guided by some power beyond themselves, like God, and they are inspired. So maybe there's some parallel between what he did in his paintings, that his hand was guided by some power beyond himself.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I thought of related to his art is that, as there was the discussion that if Pollock knew the specific end and purpose of his art, he wouldn't create any. I think that can apply to all technology that is created, because as all of these films, they always warn us what can go wrong. And of course, with the humans as they are, they can misuse the technology for harmful purposes like the nuclear power and so on. So if we knew that to what ends it can be misused, we would never create anything and there would be no progress at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that one element of mistake or some kind of deviation or aberration, which in the history, at least of humanity, has always led to progress. So I think it's that idea that these technological beings very often lack that. You know, feels weird when I say it, but the ability to make mistakes. Because sometimes we just don't focus, or we're emotionally overwhelmed, or something happens, and randomly things turn out to be very progressive, you know. So in Blade Runner, for example, there in the first one, there is there are the replicants whose main problem, you know, is that they challenge the order, and they become problematic for the people because they're so perfect. You know, and they never get tired, and so on. And so it's that kind of clashing interaction that then becomes difficult to handle.
Yeah, the same was in the film I, Robot. Like the robots, they realize how imperfect humanity is and that they are harming themselves, and that led to the revolution. And then there was this one robot who was by his creator designed to malfunction and to develop emotions in order to help the humanity survive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see that we have one more question from Jarmila.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And Ivan, thank you so much for this amazing and very interesting presentation. I just have one small question for you. I want to know your opinion. So as you know, and as you have explained to us, filmmakers and directors, they adapt the film based on literature according to our reality. So according to our era of technologies and so on and so forth. And how do you think, does this modern adaptation somehow destroy the initial, or maybe mislead the initial idea of the author of the book, for example?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of these stories, you know, Blade Runner, for example, is based on a story that I think goes back to the 70s or 60s. Do androids dream of electric sheep? And it did something really interesting, that it took the story to a different level, because the story is not as complex as the movie, and the movie becomes more complex mostly because of the visuals. So you get to imagine a future society because of the visuals. But most of the other the television series, for example, they're all original scripts written for television and film. But your question is really interesting in relation to the Klara and the Sun by Ishiguro, for example, because I think they're already considering making it into a movie, but it's very difficult to imagine that, because it's something that is told, narrated as a story, first person, you know, from the point of view of an artificial intelligence. And we're given hints. It's implied what she might look like in terms of her height and her physique. But because we don't know what exactly she looks like, that's what makes the story go on in a way. And it helps us imagine that she might be something that, you know, she might be an object that could be then used to substitute for a human. But if you have this in a movie, clearly you have to go and decide, you know, I'm going to make her look just like a human, or I'm going to make her look slightly robotic. And I think it's that aesthetic representation that can change the whole manner of perception. So I don't have an answer to your question whether it's sometimes destructive, I guess, to the original story or to the original psychology of characters. Even with Frankenstein, I mean, I keep returning to Frankenstein. I mean, there are so many movie versions of it. You know, it's referred to as the monster in the book, but then if you remember the early 20th century movie with Boris Karloff, the probably the most famous one, he's not so monstrous, really. I mean, particularly for a modern viewer. And then there are other versions of Frankenstein where the monstrosity, I guess, is more than just implied. So it all really depends on how you look at it. But I don't know. I mean, it depends. With Klara and the Sun, my suspicion would be that it's not going to be a good representation of what the story does narratively. So the visual representation would be problematic, I think, to say the least. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I don't know.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I asked why, because sometimes, you know, you're reading the book and when you watch a film, you think, they could make better. They could make, and that's why it was really interesting to know your opinion. But because I think often films, they become even better than books because of this reality. So this is the question that doesn't have any answer yet, just opinion.
Yeah, and just one really last sentence to this. You know, it's your question also leads to how you recognize if a character is a human or not. Of course, in Westworld, they completely blur the lines, and as the story progresses, then some of them you think, well, they're human, but then you realize they're not, and because you can't tell, then that's really interesting for the story development. But in Ex Machina, for example, you have a character who is obviously electronic because you see the tubes and the wires and whatnot. But that is not really the most interesting part of it, because what is really interesting is how you get to know the way she thinks, while you know all the time that she is not human. And I think the movie ends and you think, okay, well, so what was her motivation? And did she know all along? And did she manipulate the characters? Or was it random? Or was it something else? So like you said, yes, in movies, you very often have better visual instruments than in books. On the other hand, Klara and the Sun, like I said, I don't know how you have to take away so much from the story and the ambiguity to make a movie. So I don't know how they're going to do it. Well, let's wait and see, I guess. But thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Yeah, it
Thank
was
you.
really interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much once again for the presentation as well as the discussion. And okay, so this will be all for this session. Then we have here at our university 2 offline sessions. And then we have one more online presentation at 12 o'clock. So for those who are interested to join us online at 12 o'clock Central European time. Again, goodbye for now.